Well, hello again. This is Ron Matson here in Reparo, New Zealand. Chuck and I are back from our trip to the States after being gone a month. But before we start, we actually have some special guests who are here at the lodge with us. They're part of our resident study program. So I thought I'd take this opportunity to bring the Sosar family. I knew I would mess that up. Here they are. Tell us where you're from.
We came from the United States to New Zealand to River Lodge, but I'm originally from Russia, and all of my children were born in the United States, and my wife Lana is from Ukraine.
Right. So tell me why you came to the lodge. What was it? You're here for a month. You've got a couple of things you're going to be doing.
So we are here to participate in the Bronze program to study the Bible in 24 hours and complete the Bronze Medallion program. And the second part why we're here is to learn the Bible in 24 hours into Russian language.
That is exciting. That is so exciting.
Of the family are here.
Yes. Give us the sense of your family and the names, and just introduce us to your whole family.
I have my wife Lana here, my son Vitaly, Eugene, Nikita, my little daughter Emilia, and we have a friend of the family, Ruslan Kuznetsov, who's behind me.
Excellent, excellent. Now, you were telling us when you first came here that you have a little bit of a family tradition each week where you sit at breakfast and you watch the Q&A program. Tell us, how did you get into that and what happens?
Many years ago, I was working graveyard shift, and while I was driving to work, I found the program where Chuck Missler was teaching. It was a 6640 program on the radio. So I naturally was interested in all technical stuff and everything that is explains from the point of view of science. Loved it very much and introduced it to my family, and we liked it. And my kids were very small then. And it became a tradition for us. Each breakfast we would turn a TV, which was hooked up to a computer, and listen to Chuck's teaching during our breakfast. So it was going on for 12, 13 years now.
Oh, wow.
Goodness gracious. All right. And then when the Q&A programs, because you actually came to our conference also in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, didn't you?
Yes, we were all 3 days there.
Excellent, excellent. And you were telling me that you also find that you've listened to enough of Chuck's material now, so that as you go through, tell us the story.
Yes, so we started listening to Bible in 24 hours, and we found ourselves finishing Chuck's sentences and some of the things he was saying, because we listened to so much of the material, so we just know what's the next phrase will be.
Absolutely wonderful. Well, it's wonderful to have you here. And for those of you that are watching, this is just yet again another opportunity that's being played out here by people who are taking advantage of the study program here in Reparo, New Zealand at the River Lodge. So thank you very much for coming and joining us and sharing with our video audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Very much.
Well, Chuck, it's always interesting to see the people who've been impacted by the ministry that God has really blessed the world with. And we just got back from a month-long trip to the United States. It was sort of a trip down, in one sense, trip down memory lane. But we went to the Naval Academy, first of all, for your 60th reunion. And we began to post various pictures on Facebook as we were going along. We wanted people to sort of get a sense of being with us. Our first day there, the first official event that we saw was the noon formation, where all the companies get together and form up so they can march in for lunch. And was that something that you did as a cadet every single?
Oh yeah, for each meal. It's good, the meal formation.
Right, and so there were 30 companies there. That's a lot of guys in each company, and they all rotate into
about 4,000 people sit down to a family dinner in the mess hall. But the formality of forming at their locations, and they march in. And,
right.
They usually have, now also, they do that at each meal, but they also had a formal parade once a week.
Yeah, and that was the thing that we also saw on the Saturday too, didn't we?
Yeah, and they did, the Warden Field is the location. Whatever dignitary was visiting Washington would be typically treated to they'd time it so they would have
Right,
the formal
right.
parade.
Yes.
And so that was part of the life there, strangely enough.
Right, right.
So we,
And so it was a regiment that you were committed to, and of course we attended it, and really there was a lot of observations that you began to make by that time. I mean, give us your first impressions. We arrived a day early, but by Thursday we found ourselves going to the first sort of mixer, which was in the evening. And what was your first impression?
Well, I couldn't help but, I can't recall where I first started to notice, but clearly there was a decay of values. Some of the things, what we were experiencing when we were there was many notches higher than was going on there. They've lowered their standards. It's a mere shell of what it used to be. And I think that was disturbing to really come to grips with the fact that that which was the best of the best back several decades ago had decayed to just a government-sponsored school with its co-ed, of course, and all that, but also the standards. When you see them march so didn't have the sharpness, the precision that we took for granted when we were there.
Right, because even on that very first day, you were talking about the fact that there just didn't seem to be the crispness. Many people seemed to be out of uniform. In terms of what you remember would have been a requirement when you were at the Naval
Everything was
Academy.
very, very tight, very precise. They'd lost that. It just is. It isn't. It was a mere shell of what it used to be, frankly.
Right.
So
right.
much so that it took me a while to really come to grips with the fact that it just wasn't what it used to be.
Right.
And so.
And another thing we did was we went up to Memorial Hall. We had
I wanted to make a point of that because this was the 60th at reunion. I had come back for the 50th, and I got in quite a discussion with Admiral Haskins there because I asked, "What about Michael New?" That was at the time back then, he was the airman that refused to shed his American uniform. They insisted that he wear a UN uniform. He would do whatever they told him to do, but he'd do it as an American soldier. And they court-martialed him for that. And I challenged Admiral Haskins, because we took an oath of office to defend the Constitution of the United States, and I found out, I said, how can you justify, this guy that wouldn't shed his American uniform? And he says, because when you sign up now for them, you sign up for defending any treaty that the nation goes into.
Yes.
Which means that you now swear an allegiance to all the nation. What's the name?
The United Nations.
United
in that
Nations.
sense.
Yeah,
That's right.
And so I made a point of going back when I was at Memorial Hall. It's in brass. They haven't changed that.
No, that's right.
They do change what they actually swear them. In Memorial Hall, we take an oath of office, and I challenged them. It was in this hallway that we swore an oath, and it's still there on brass.
Yes.
To support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and that defending the Constitution of the United States is not the same thing as the rule of the nation. So, because this was a commitment to freedom.
Yes.
The current one is a commitment to tyranny, and they're not the people practicing have no grasp of that. I was really quite startled that they felt free to change the very oath that we were held to.
Yes.
And I felt it was even from the 50th. I felt a real sense of betrayal. At the 60th, I saw it even more in spades. That the things that we held sacred and swore our lives to were a myth.
Yes.
And so it was hard for me to let go of that, especially. So I went back to the 60th, which we did. I have no plans, no intention to return on the 70th.
Right.
It's the things that we were committed to, that we felt part of, that we had an identity with, are a myth of the past.
Right. There was another observation that you made when we were there early on, and especially as we began to go to some of the meal gatherings with your classmates, and especially those of your own company. And you made some observations with regards to the people that you seemed to really link with, and other people which you knew for the longest period of time, But tell us about that.
Well, the guys, it was interesting to see, these were guys that had served out their service time, then they had retired and played golf, whatever. But at this point in their life, that was even behind them.
Yes.
And there was a real emptiness. As one guy summarized it, he says, we got to the top rung of the ladder and found out it was leaning on the wrong wall.
Yes, yes.
In other words, they hadn't committed themselves to something that had durability. And the exceptions, there were certain people that would just...
We had some fantastic conversations, though, didn't we? But tell us about who they were.
They were the Christians.
They were.
There were those that were serious Christians, and we quickly bonded because we had something to look forward to.
Yes.
The others really had a vacancy because they had retired. They'd gone through all that. They'd played golf for years.
Yeah.
You can just do that so much. And they admitted to an emptiness because they could only look back, not look forward.
Yes.
They had not looked forward to, and the Christians were interesting to really experience the differences because we immediately tuned up and, it was...
Yes. Well, there was certainly one, I know I went along just sort of as the guy to carry the bags, but along with my wife Marcy, but and to join you on the trip as we were traveling around the U.S. But there was one incident for me that was also telling in that same sense, and that was in the very first night we were having dinner, and there was a fellow sitting next to you. He was not part of your company, so you would not necessarily have known him when you went to school, because there are, as you said, more than 4,000 cadets there. But he was an individual.
Midshipman.
Midshipman, sorry.
Cadets,
my gosh, slap me.
No, it's a small point that is subtle, but it's important.
Yes.
If you went to West Point, you were a member of the Corps of Cadets.
Yes.
You got your commission when you graduated. It happens that in the Navy, the midshipman is a rank in the Navy.
There you go.
And so you actually hold rank. And that causes some interesting disjunctures, if you will.
Right.
But the midshipman holds a rank in the Navy, and that if you decide during your time there to resign, you resign from the Secretary of the Navy.
Right.
If you're at West Point, you just resign from the Corps of Cadets, from the superintendent of the school. You follow me? And there's a subtle difference, but it shows up in some interesting ways. That's why we're...
Yes. You have to correct I used the wrong term. Cadet is with the Army and midshipman with the Navy. But while we were there was a fellow sitting next to you, which, strangely enough, as we were having our meal, I kept looking at him and thinking, I know this man. And I thought, how can this possibly be? How can I know somebody that went to school with you 60 years ago? How can I possibly know this fella? And as I sat there, I remembered that his name was Orville Wright. and he is the grandson of Orville Wright. So you went to school with him. I worked with him in England for the better part of about 6 or 7 years. And so we were able to strike up a conversation about our working together.
Sure.
In the late 90s, early 2000s. He was the chief test pilot, the test program for the helicopter program I was working on for the Royal Navy. But it was strange just to see the two of you together, because he was he took his commission in the Navy, served his time, became a commanding officer, and he was one of those highly distinguished, very, very excellent career. But as I compared the two of you, it was interesting that he was openly admitting, I live in upstate New York now, and I'm just retired. I said, what do you do now? And he says, nothing. I do nothing with my life. And then I was sitting next to you realizing, wow, you maybe weren't the grandson of Orville Wright, but what God has done through you in the years because of your commitment to Christ is amazing.
Well, yes, it is, because you're always you're always going forward. You have a destiny.
Yes.
Beyond what we're dealing with.
Yes.
And that's a very real, vital aspect to life.
Yes.
And it's not there for those that aren't Christian.
Well, another thing that I pointed out when we were there, I said, because there was a lot of those guys, there is the sense of when you're in their company. Of course, there was a segregation between those who actually went into the military and, like yourself, those who went short and then went into industry. The people who stayed in the military, they were the ones who were making all the speeches and sort of still the top of the class kind of things in terms of notice. And I remember at one point pointing to you and I said, all these fellows in here all are known among themselves. But I said, but there's not very many people who have a Facebook following like you do. And I got to go to this because this was a fun thing that we were doing on our trip. We decided that we would just put up various things just about the life of Chuck Missler. Here was one that we put up, Chuck eating a hot dog at Costco. And it had 153 comments within a few hours, more than 1,600 likes, more than 24,000 people reached by the post. I mean, Chuck, that has to give you a sense of
weirdness.
Of weirdness, yes. But it means that life given to Christ means something. It touches people's lives, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Yes,
and so, unlike so many of the conversations that we had at the Naval Academy, and again, I'm not saying that they haven't. I'm not trying to make fun of them in that sense. I'm just simply saying it just seems so much richer when we were surrounded by the appearance of worldly success versus that of sowing in the area of the everlasting and the spiritual.
That's true. There's a spiritual dimension you're highlighting, but also there is a value system that we all subscribe to in our impressionable years, and we signed up to give our life to. That value system isn't there anymore.
Yes.
It was disturbing to really come to grips with the fact that the very values that bonded us when we were, back then, isn't there. Mm-hmm. And today, when you watch a march, it didn't have the precision, mm-hmm. the uniformity. And I'm sorry, I see the goal was a school to raise combatant leaders.
Yes.
Leaders for destiny in combat. And all of that's a thing of the past.
Yes.
Now it's just a government-funded school, and there isn't the uniformity of dress, there isn't the precision of requirement. I mean, it was the precision that we were held to as midshipmen back then is a different standard than they hold to today. And you can just tell them when they march and when you watch what goes on, it isn't the same thing. It's just a government-funded school, no more.
Yes.
And the idea of it somehow growing combatant leadership is a thing of the past.
Right. Well, after that, of course, we came back to Post Falls, Idaho, took care of some business, and then we got ready for our Strategic Perspectives Conference, our annual international conference in Coeur d'Alene. It was well attended, well appointed.
That's something that
people really enjoyed it.
In itself, it's become probably one of the most coveted platforms.
Right.
In an annual calendar. Many people mark their calendar to be sure to join us in October for the Strategic Perspectives Conference.
Well, one of the things that we discovered at this particular conference was that there was a large percentage of people that it was their first conference, and the reason why they came was because they heard about it through the Q&A program here on YouTube. And again, I thank the audience that we have watching us, that they react to it. They were, warm in that sense. There was a lot of beautiful exchange. And old Codger was there. In fact, I want to just put this picture up because of all this. I was the MC throughout the thing, and yet when it came to my turn to speak, you insisted on introducing me, and that was very touching for me. I think for all the speakers, I was the one that you wanted to get up and give an introduction.
Absolutely.
And I appreciated that. We also had a speaker, Dr. Peter Flint.
He's a legend in his own right. He was the widely acknowledged expert on the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yes.
And it was amazing to me to see how endeared he was to joining us on our platform.
Oh, he was. It was astonishing. In fact, when when Peter came, let's give people a little bit of background. Peter Flint has been involved in the research of the Dead Sea Scrolls for over 20 years. He is one of 70 official members of the Dead Sea Scroll editors worldwide. Now, this is sort of the Sanhedrin of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Tremendous man. He's done a briefing package with Koinonia House, which we've published, called the Dead Sea Scrolls.
He actually
translated
Isaiah from the Paleo-Hebrew
Yes.
to English. The result, his work product is a proprietary product of the International Standard Version Bible.
Yes, yes, and he was a late edition, really a God thing. When he arrived, you're correct. He kept telling us about how he felt he was coming to family, that he was loving the organization and the people, and of course,
He was really quite startled with the warmth that we all embraced him with.
Yes, and then of course it was Friday night. He presented on Thursday. On Friday night, he had a medical episode, which we stopped the conference and had everyone at the conference pray for him as he was taken off to the hospital. He came back Saturday morning as bright and aware as possible. In fact, we had a lunchtime Q&A session, which became vacant because one of the speakers had to leave early, and so Peter jumped right in and took the Q&A session. He was full of enjoying himself Sunday morning on the cruise, so all the way through Saturday, all the way through Sunday. He gets on a plane, goes home, and unfortunately, on the 4th of November, he suddenly passed. And we have got some news from his wife, Amanda, and she said that he was in the hospital, he was in critical condition, but that when he went to be with the Lord, he was literally on the side of his bed, kneeling in prayer when the Lord took him. And a tremendous man. He was a man who was very special to us as a ministry, wasn't he?
Very much so, very much so.
And his response to us was just amazing.
And we almost felt we'd lost a member of the family. There was a
Yeah.
warmth among us, the whole group, with him.
Yes, absolutely right, absolutely right. Well, Chuck, there was another little stir that was going on in the halls during the conference, in that about halfway through the conference, we put this poster up. We put this poster up, and it surprised a lot of people. Those of you that get our Personal Update magazine know that that's the cover of our October, but we sort of surprised everyone with the sense of this poster. And the theme really is, when we say we want you, it's not for something to do for us, is it? It really is about, we want them to
become reproducers.
Become reproducers and become active in a way that...
Not just learn it, but to learn to teach it.
Yes, yes. And so we're really focusing our efforts now as an institute to...
Well, explain the initiative that you started.
Well, the initiative is very simple, and that is that in the past, Koinonia Institute was organized around the idea that a person who's interested in studying the Bible would come to the Institute, they would join it, and they would join an online class, and they would be assigned a teaching assistant. And that's how it was originally organized. We recognized that another way to do that was to allow the individuals who've been through our course material to use that course material themselves to start their own groups. And so we started just in the end of September. The program, I think we have about 9 or 10 groups now, official groups. We have a number of unofficial groups that are around South Korea, in India, in Romania, a number of places
Russia.
where people have, and soon to be in Russia, yes. And the idea is that if they are interested in becoming a group leader, what we're looking for initially are those who have been through our bronze medallion program. We are requiring that at the moment because we want people to at least be familiar with the breadth of the material. And then all they have to do, we provide everything. We've provided the videos free online. All the Learn the Bible in 24 Hours, the remastered videos, are now free on YouTube, so they can see all the sessions. They are there with English and Spanish subtitles, soon to have Russian subtitles. But there's also some other nuances and features about that. They can sign up, and once they get set up as a group, they can then issue to their friends, their church members, their co-workers, whoever they want to invite into their group. They then go to the kigroups.info where they can register, and they do so by taking that group leader's code with them, and it puts them in that classroom. And so whether they're meeting in a hall together, a living room together, or virtually, there could be old college buddies, old Naval Academy grads that could link up and be in a virtual classroom together. And we're really excited about this going forward, because we've seen examples of what happens when the body of Christ itself begins to reproduce, when people begin to learn so that they can teach others. And in this instance, they don't need to teach the Bible study, they just need to facilitate it. And we'll provide them with the material. We had people ask us at the conference, where can I get a copy of that poster? They just want to, because it's a great, our artist, Dean Packwood, made it for us. And of course, they'll recognize.
I'll eventually forgive him.
That's right. And it's around that idea of the World War II sort of "we want you" sort of thing. But really, we are in a war. I mean, that's why we sort of adopted that motif. We need to recognize that the war that we're really in is a war not for governments or territory, but really it's a spiritual warfare for the lives of people, isn't it, Chuck?
Yes, it is. And that puts us in a very interesting predicament right now, because here we are recording this, and it happens that while we're doing this, there's an election being determined in the matter of hours. What people that are listening to this don't realize is that while we're recording this, we don't know who's won the election.
Yes.
We're a few hours away, apparently, and we will go to press before we know whether Trump or Clinton or what's going on there.
Right.
But that highlights we're not for or against either one of the candidates. I lean towards Trump for those that want to know, but the real point is I regard the whole thing as an IQ test for the electorate. In other words, whether they have the brains to understand the choice they need to make.
Right.
But the real choice isn't that anyway. That's why we've adopted
Yes,
this.
tell them about that. Nobody, they're going to think we're not. This isn't part of a bowling team that we're not.
No,
right?
it's make him known.
It was a logo that was from a church in Manila. And they adopted a slogan for a campaign 3 years ago and the whole idea was to mobilize their church to make him, that is Jesus, known. That's the key subject, really, isn't it?
And it's so appropriate right now because everybody is either for Trump or Clinton or worried about the U.S. elections, where we are for neither one really.
Yes.
For a variety of reasons, but the election that we insist upon is the election of the Lord Jesus Christ.
Absolutely.
To get to know Him, and I usually argue that the book I, Jesus, His own words, describe who He is, and most Christians have no grasp of who He really is.
Yeah, you refer to it as a mistaken identity, don't you?
Mistaken identity. It's the most dangerous mistaken identity in our lives. We need to understand who He really is, and that's our mission, not the election, not the political election. As pivotal as that is for the United States, we watch it with a certain detachment. We're really watching it from the point of view of our King. Absolutely.
And another thing I think it's important, you mentioned the fact that we're recording this here on the 8th of November, which is a day ahead of course, the states. Or the 9th of November, they're electing their president now. And we know that as we're firing up the Q&A sessions, there'll be lots of people based on the outcome will be sending us questions. And really, I think the Lord has shown us that there's an answer for all this, isn't it? And it's in a book of the Bible that you taught through.
There's a book, it's interesting that we speak of the major prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and so forth. That's a librarian's category because they're the largest.
Right.
And down to Daniel, okay? It's strange, there's another 12 books that are called the minor prophets, but again, that's a librarian's label. Strangely, Hosea is larger than Daniel, so that's neither here nor there. It turns out, it comes as a real shock to students to discover that the most important one of the bunch is Hosea.
Yes.
And it is the most relevant one for America.
Yes.
It shocked me to revisit that. We have a very in-depth study of Hosea, and and it's available on the air.
Yep.
You can acquaint yourself with it. But it's not only an engaging book with full of surprises for the student, but the biggest shock that comes out of it is the relevance for us today.
Right.
Not just for Isaiah way back when that,
Yes.
Israel and all that. America today.
Yes.
And so I invite you to take a look at it and consider taking it on as a study, an in-depth study. It's an engaging, surprising, rich reward available to anyone that wants to do that.
Well, again, those of you that have just heard, we are doing this before the election's finished, but Chuck's reference to the book of Hosea is something that we really want to get to you. So if you go to the comment section here, you'll see that we're putting a YouTube link. We're going to upload that for free. Session 1, I think it really speaks to the sense of America, but also I think the world. Very timely, and so we're taking it and taking session number 1. We're going to load it up as a full session and encourage you to also take a look at that. So, and then next week, what we're going to do is you have a week now to watch that video and to compose your questions based on that perspective. And we're going to have a detailed discussion based on your questions after reviewing that material. So this is a live, undocumented class that you're going to be involved in. Watch the first session of Hosea and then send us during this week your questions concerning that as it relates to both historically and prophetically. And then we'll be addressing that in our next QA session.
They should be
next week.
warned, though. It's likely to be addictive.
It is.
It is so
It is.
engaging. It will surprise you as you get into it.
Absolutely right. And so with that, we're going to come to the end of our broadcast. But again, thank you very much for spending time with us. And we're glad to be back with you. And just pray that God will continue to bless you as you continue to study His Word. God bless you.
We listen to so much of the material, so we just know what's the next phrase will be.
Absolutely wonderful. Well, it's wonderful to have you here. And for those of you that are watching, this is just yet again another opportunity that's being played out here by people who are taking advantage of the study program here in Reparo, New Zealand at the River Lodge. So thank you very much for coming and joining us and sharing with our video audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
You betcha.
Well, Chuck, it's always interesting to see the people who've been impacted by the ministry that God has really blessed the world with. And we just got back from a month-long trip to the United States. It was sort of a trip down, in one sense, trip down memory lane. But we went to the...
Introduced it to my family and we liked it. And my kids were very small then. And it became a tradition for us. Each breakfast we would turn a TV which was hooked up to a computer and listen to Chuck's teaching during our breakfast. So it was going on for 12, 13 years now.
Oh, wow.
Goodness gracious! All right, and then when the Q&A programs, because when you actually came to our conference also in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, didn't you?
Yes, we were all 3 days there.
Excellent, excellent. And you were telling me that you also find that you've listened to enough of Chuck's material now, so that as you go through, tell us the story.
Yes, so we started listening to Bible in 24 hours, and we found ourselves finishing Chuck's sentences and some of the things he was saying, because we came from the United States to New Zealand to River Lodge, but I'm originally from Russia, and all of my children were born in the United States, and my wife Lana is from Ukraine.
Right. So tell me why you came to the lodge. What was it? You're here for a month. You've got a couple of things you're going to be doing.
So we are here to participate in the Bronze program to study the Bible in 24 hours. and complete the bronze medallion program. And the second part, while we're here, is to translate Learn the Bible in 24 hours into Russian language.
That is exciting. That is so exciting.
Of the family are here.
Yes, give us the sense of your family and the names, and just introduce us to your whole family.
I have my wife Lana.
Well, hello again. This is Ron Matson here in Reparo, New Zealand. Chuck and I are back from our trip to the States after being gone a month. But before we start, we actually have some special guests who are here at the lodge with us. They're part of our resident study program. So I thought I'd take this opportunity to bring the Slosar family. I knew I would mess that up. Here they are. Tell us where you're from.
I'm here. My son Vitaly, Eugene, Nikita, my little daughter Emilia, and we have a friend of the family, Ruslan Kuznetsov, who's behind me.
Excellent, excellent. Now, you were telling us when you first came here that you have a little bit of a family tradition each week where you sit at breakfast and you watch the Q&A program. Tell us, how did you get into that and what happens?
Many years ago, I was working graveyard shift, and while I was driving to work, I found the program where Chuck Missler was teaching. It was a 6640 program on the radio. So I naturally was interested in all technical stuff and everything that is explains from the point of view of science. Loved it very much and